Jiva, A Story of Soul and a Way to See It by Gregory Odell. The Path. On the first night, while sleeping in my warm, soft bed, I strayed upon a beautiful fountain bubbling up from a small mound atop a hill in the midday sun. I stood there gazing at the surge of rising, sparkling bubbles, breaching the mound's rim, spilling its crystalline icing over the hilltop sand. Thinking of my friends, I turned and called to them as they sat resting in a hollow out of the sun. They stayed in the shade, not wanting to come. On the next night, while sleeping in my warm, soft bed, I found a second fountain, just as beautiful as the first, and again called to my friends. I could still see my friends squatting with their hats over their eyes, and gave out a yell that echoed back off the canyon run. They stayed in the shade, not wanting to come. On the third night, while sleeping in my warm, soft bed, I scanned my own horizon, realizing what I had been shown. All must walk the path alone. I straightened my stance as loneliness cut to the bone, then walked a trail leading into the evening sun, never looking back to see if my friends had come. Jiva, A Story of Soul and a Way to See It. True illustration of soul is problematic, and many claim that its essence is so profound it renders the description as indescribable. Perhaps this is true. However, it makes good sense to first know what you're looking for, or looking at, and then try to understand how it acts. If we examine only those features that prove to be rationally similar, then it is probable that soul is at least approachable. If soul can be approached, then it is just a matter of getting close enough to view it in order to describe and illustrate what it looks like. The best approach will prove to be an established path. Once in view, further interrogation of the mysteries of soul and its purpose can be left to the individual to explore on their own. First, we will lay a solid foundation for our thoughts, see what soul actually looks like, and then its essence must logically follow. Youth or old age is a needless concern. The trek into consciousness will be as safe as exploring our own backyard, nor should the deep thinkers of our troop account the trip to soul to be nothing of value, for there is something actually to be seen. Nevertheless, we must move forward with those who are willing, and say goodbye to those who are not interested. The campground fundamentalist can wait until our return, when it is safe to believe there is something outside the tent village. Before we begin our journey, proper preparations must be made, or common ground must be established, and those unwilling or unable to travel must be left behind. Just as with any trek into the wilderness, it would be unwise to force an unwilling person to go along with us, especially if they believe that the wilderness stops at the edge of the campsite. So it is to force someone to believe there is something called soul and a way to see it. Be assured that the only leap of faith required for our trip is to recognize our park guide as a person of skill. Nothing beyond the direction, length, and expectation of what is to be seen will be required of our hired hand. We need not burden her with complex questions of reality, or force upon her our religious viewpoints, because after all, she's just showing the way. What about the children at the campground? Certainly there are children here, and naturally they believe there is a wilderness to explore, because they know we are preparing to go there. There is little difference between a child's view and that of a typical campground fundamentalist, except the child is activating the potential that a wilderness is beyond the campsite. Not by blind faith, but by experience, the child will prove a forest beyond the trees. First, the guide urges the group around the campfire and states something like this.
As understanding propels us to the center of truth, we gain unfathomable momentum. Easily overcoming the speed of light, we quickly penetrate the etheric sheath of timeless eternity, bursting with the big bang of uniform silent stillness as we awake to a quiet world with horizons stretching into the formless purity of form.
Excitement electrifies campfire consciousness. Even the true campground fundamentalist wants to believe that there is something of great spiritual value that can be found beyond the limits of their own understanding. Our guide continues.
Our bare feet shall trod the cool grass of a mystic garden the Hebrew calls Eden, where Adam was formed from God's image from moistened dust of this plain.
After packing our kits with the necessary items, we start our trek. A few travelers may drop out early as we begin our journey. As in every group, there will be a few who refuse to agree that a tree is a tree, a rock is a rock, and a wolf can be a dangerous animal, so it's fruitless to argue necessity. It's true that our trip could be relative or perhaps subjective. However, the travel brochure promises that there will be a point of focus where essential features will look exactly the same to all the travelers. So there is a good chance to see Seoul even in the off-season. Fiddling and tightening their wobbling backpacks, two businessmen in our troop mumbled to each other, "What the heck? We are here. What do we have to lose?" A few of our children are smiling and watching the chubby men. They say nothing. They know they will see Seoul. A woman from Kansas murmurs an unheard condescending remark about the Far Eastern couple to a soccer mom, glancing down when the camera toters look her direction. Behind some tall timbers, a retired physician shoves a whiskey flask at an old colleague who grabs the flask grudgingly, only on the second thrust. He tilts back the flask, taking a big swig as if an expert, yet his face says, "Only because you're my friend." The old doctor stashes the flask back into his Fifth Avenue hunting trousers, as if the contents were rationed for emergency use only. Fortunately for his colleague, the good doctor hoards the elixir for the rest of the journey. It is our good fortune to also have with us the famed Mr. Diggs, on vacation from his editorial position with the journal Archaeology Now. He is accompanied by Mr. Ashok Kumar, an expert on Indian subcultures and Eastern religious faiths. Mr. Diggs looks intentively out over a nearby lake, simply called Known, as Mr. Kumar gestures with his hands while lecturing in the deaf ear of the archaeologist. Perhaps Mr. Diggs has heard a similar proposition before. So much for the campers standing beyond the group gathered for our guide's safety briefing, while the norm of our group, the majority, attentively listen to the guide, company's rules and policies being presented, an essential requirement for the trek. A few show irritation at the laughing children around their feet and glance toward the soccer mom busy with the activities of our Far Eastern couple. A tall man in the group suggests a prayer before the trip, and they all bow their heads without hesitation. Our good doctor bows as he emerges from the camouflage of the trees. His companion, Dr. Jack Athea from Cambridge University, rolls his eyes sarcastically toward the sky, his eyes searching for the mysterious great sky god. As they pray, Mr. Kumar's voice is carried over the prayer via the lake called Known.
Swami Atmananda rebuts the claim, arguing Jiva refers to the soul, the individual self, and Paramatma means God, which is in total contrast to the original text of the Vedas, whereas Jiva is soul.
Many bowed eyes pop open as Mr. Kumar continues his pagan private lecture. Mr. Diggs continues to look over the lake as the prayer ends. Mr. Kumar asks,
"Are you coming? Diggs, are you coming?"
They both move toward the prayer group, now busy sorting and stacking, focusing their attention on the soccer mom dragging two boys by their arms to backpacks lying on the ground. The bustle quiets down to a solemn,
"Okay, we're ready. Which way do we go?"
Our beautiful guide takes the lead. Our troop begins at once, single file up a narrow trail rising on a rocky embankment. As sure as always, the moment the trek begins, everyone moans silently. Why did I bring all this junk? Everyone except Mr. Diggs, who wisely packed as if doing archaeological fieldwork, and little Linda, too young to carry anything but herself. Fortunately, the trail levels quickly, widens, and stretches into a cool, shaded forest, a welcome relief from the hot morning sun. Conversation dies a natural death as each member tires of their physical burden and instead engages in a hypnotic stride, stepping in cadence of one foot in front of the other. The children notice the humming sound of a huge swarm of bees over the constant swishing of rubbing vinyl packs against American jeans. No need to be alarmed. They've heard this sound before, confirmed by quick nods to each other. It is familiar sound of unknown origin you have heard as a child, in the quiet of nature and surely while swimming underwater. The mature members of the trail hear it too. They have learned to ignore this essential feature of soul that abounds about us and is always with us. Little Linda listens intently as a kind of whistle, or perhaps the single note of a flute, grows louder than changes its pitch as the sound emerges from the subtle buzzing that's all around. Unafraid, she knows she's not alone. The older travelers are happy to view the first summit, and chatter breaks out among them. overwhelming the subtle sounds of nature.
What did she say?
The thin man with a long braided ponytail asked his wife of seemingly unkempt hair.
Hank's Hangout. Yes, just as it's painted on that rotting sign we passed.
Thanked the mother from Kansas. Her name is Jane, I think. Yes, Miss Plain Jane is the first adult to reach the summit, chasing the two uncontrollable boys. She sees a local teenager under the shadows of a grass roof hut, stretched out in a hammock over a makeshift bar. The children startle the summer worker, and before Jane can reach the door less opening, he jumps from the hammock and slides the net of ropes out of sight, looking back innocently as if he had been working hard all day. Quietly, the group gathers into the veranda, taking seats in hanging hammocks and bamboo chairs. A roar of conversation erupts while the much-awaited sandwiches are procured. Each peel back the brown paper, disguising important distinctions between one sandwich from the next, those with mayo, without mayo, with pickles, and so on. Then, without a word, each guest folds the sandwiches back together and begin enjoying their lunch, as if one mind sharing the same thing. Two opportunities find the diversion appropriate to belly up unseen to the bar. The two young men vacationing from college ask for another beer before the first can be served, and way before their 21st birthdays. They hand the summer worker a crisp $20 bill and say,
"Keep the change."
The worker murmurs loud to himself,
"Why, this is the first tip I've ever earned."
"Yeah, just keep 'em coming," drawls a future scholar. Our guide stands up and gives a little prepared speech.
Welcome to Hank's Hangout, an old hunting lodge erected for that purpose in the early 1950s, now a forest preserve outside the park's range, and more recently, a noted civil liberties case of public domain. Some of you have queried about the ballpark prices. Hank's is supported solely on the sandwiches you are enjoying this very moment. Be assured this money covers the merger salaries of student workers, as well as the rest of the general upkeep. We ask those who wish to, and those who can, to give a donation at this time.
One of our college boys says to his buddy,
$6 for a beer? Keep the change. Hell, take my wallet.
Hank's bartender tries to pass a metal coffee can marked Hank's Donations to our businessmen, who instinctively glance away. The can somehow begins circulating as all members of the group take their turn stuffing the smiley face drawn on the plastic top. Linda's arms stretch high for her turn. The can descends, and she clumsily inserts an open-faced $5 bill that her grandfather gave her a month ago. Her face glows, sparked by detachment, as the can disappears into the crowd with her life savings. Our guide continues, pointing outside.
Probate Court has given us, the guide company, the privilege to lease the small cylinder block building for dry storage for those weary travelers who wish to lighten their load.
The young bartender calls out as if on cue, trying his best to sound professional.
Last call to lighten the load.
He holds up a key attached to a piece of lumber, sees to ensure that it doesn't walk away again. The two businessmen instinctively glance toward the key and say silently to themselves, "Entrepreneur." The majority of our group queues up with their loads, as if publicly denouncing their sins. One at a time, the pilgrims drop their bags haphazardly in the small building, emerging back through the narrow passageway with a glow of forgiveness. Linda watches and smiles wide at the procession because she has nothing to let go of. The group slowly moves outside to the scenic view that makes Hank's noteworthy. They watch a small snake-like river as it lazily winds towards the crystal-clear lake called Unknown of the Valley of the Unexplored beneath them. In unison, our born-again majority deeply inhales the refreshing mountain air and exhales slowly, glowing with the serenity that slowly fills their entire being. The corners of the traveler's eyes catch the good doctor sneaking something back into the many folds and pockets of his hunting trousers, and quickly look back over the valley thinking,
whatever he's doing must be forgivable too.
For a moment, our gazers relish their own humble ability as their shoulders droop slightly downward in a picturesque pose, suggesting,
this is how others see me, as a good, forgiving Christian.
Linda wonders if they are playing charades. The mood is broken by a stream of unintelligible words bouncing off the deaf ears of our archaeologist. From the lips of Mr. Kumar, the two rambunctious boys stare at the motor mouth, wondering if he has an on-off switch. The guide gently breaks the group's concentration and motions toward the trail. The gathering rambles towards a focal point in the center of a grassless circle, like robots, while their minds are engaged in some higher idea. The children dance in the center like fairies, pretending to be pagan savages orbiting a sacred fire. Again, the subtle sounds of nature strengthen as the planets play homage to a dwarf star. The children welcome the heavenly sounds, while the adults imagine what the Joneses will say upon their return. But this time, one of the businessmen hears the familiar but unforgotten rhythm of his youth, a subtle yet unmistakable beating of a drum as it emerges from the melodious tunes about them, beating in cadence with the marching hiking boots. First he thinks it's the sound of his own heart, remembers his youth just for a moment, and then completely forgets as the sound fades into the distance. Mr. Jennings, the tall man who usually leads the prayer, is the first to see a trail marker with his point painted on the side. He looks to our guide and she explains,
"We have 2 more summits before our return trip, and time has obscured the original summit names. We have come to know them as His Point and Her Point, respectfully. We heard from those before us that around 175 years ago, a couple claimed this area as their homestead, but the story has so many versions, it's difficult to tell which is right. The names have been long since forgotten, so we simply call them His Point and Her Point."
As the trail turns, they come upon a tented veranda and a teenager in the middle, working what looks like a hot dog stand. They are all relieved to find that her cart contains all kinds of sweets and even some more sandwiches for those who are still hungry. As soon as our troop eyes the "no charge" provided by sign, all the goodies are quickly depleted from her cart except the saltine crackers, sealed tightly for ages in cellophane plastic wrappers. After a while, they begin hiking again, and soon come upon a marker of stacked stones with black painted lettering on top labeled "My Point." Our guide explains that a feminist group had come before them and built the stone monument. All the women smiled and thought,
"My Point."
As they look out over the vista, they see an odd-looking shape on the side of a hill. As the adults stand,
Squinting their eyes to bring the distant object into focus, the children mimic their movement. The good doctor laughs and explains to the children,
The older you get, the greater the need to squint to focus on things at a distance, because the cornea muscles get too weak to elongate. Stretch the opening of the pupil wide to bring the distant object into focus.
One of the children says, "He must have real good eyes," and then points to the odd-shaped face on the bluff's steep north side, which seems to be caved from the rock. The hill bluff comes into focus, and what they earlier missed in detail, they now all begin to see. A huge, funny-looking face seemingly carved into the cliffside. Every ear is humming with a beautiful, melodious sound. Our guide tries to explain. "On my first trip here as an apprentice, the carved cartoon features struck me with awe. I could not laugh, for its very presence filled me with a bliss I have never known. Something about its complex simplicity is completely familiar to me." The group eyes a perfect rainbow beyond the cliff face, but says nothing. Mr. Kumar puts in his 2 cents that no one hears. They all march toward the cliff face. The huge face shines in the sun with 2 huge stretched elongated eyes. Sally, a young girl amongst the children, calls out, "It's a clown!" However, the subtle features fade quickly into the rock crevices as the illusion of the clown face quickly disappears as they near the cliff face. Despite the sun no longer in their faces, a discouraging steep trail is in view, and one by one they line up in single file and begin climbing the cliff wall. Huffing and puffing, the 2 chubby businessmen are the last to emerge from the natural steps to a shaded plateau in front of an old abandoned mine shaft. Mr. Jennings is yelling to Mrs. Jane, who apparently followed several children into the shaft from the tunnel's entrance. The guide tries to speak over the loud voices. "It's quite all right. The structure is in good shape and has recently been inspected." Our group huddles around the dark hole, looking in despair, as if silently saying, "All the way up here for this?" Our guide instructs the troop, "Please, only small groups at a time, and leave all your belongings there on the picnic table. It's very close-quartered inside." As the group accepts the fact that Mr. Jennings, Mrs. Jane, and the children are first come, first serve, eagerly await their turn. The group outside the mine entrance can hear the children laughing inside as Mr. Jennings calls out to them to get close to his campsite flashlight.
Why can't he see?
The children say in unison, as if in retribution to the narrow beam of the flashlight borrowed from a campsite fundamentalist left behind at the campground. Inside the tunnel, some 50 feet from the shaft entrance, the walls expand to a dome-shaped room. As the wide-eyed adults watch the children dancing around some unknown orb of light emitting a mystical blue hue from the center of the room. Mr. Jennings and Mrs. Jane stand like wallflowers at the farthest distance from the center of the circle. Two of the children sing in cadence.
I am that I am, Sam I am.
Other children join in.
I am that I am, Sam I am.
The children continue the chorus, intensifying the rhythm and tone of their melody every step as it is repeated. "Children, hush!" barks Mrs. Plain Jane to the deaf ears of the children dancing in the blue light. "Jane, don't you see it?" asked Mr. Jennings. "What, the light?" "No, I mean, not really. Do you see it?" and begins laughing while extending his flashlight. "Of course, Sam I am." Mrs. Plain Jane's face lights with a crystal white light as quite possibly her first real smile cracks the norm of her face. Mr. Kumar enters the mine uninvited, as if thinking to himself, "Why, the guide didn't mean me," and emerges into the cavern room with eyes wide with excitement. He begins to give a discourse. He is shocked to find, however, perhaps for the first time in his career, an audience actually attentive and waiting to hear what he has to say. Taken aback by the unexpected attention, Mr. Kumar stutters and looks down to the ground, then lifts his head as it bursts with sparkling white light, as he barks in a condescending voice, "This is what I tried to explain to my students, but they never seem to get it." His face shines, as if it is the first time he got it, and the children cadence,
I am that I am, Sam I am.
The Indo-Aryan's rhetoric improves greatly as he descends from his academic pulpit to the level of the audience below and explains as if he has solely held a secret for ages. But now, finally, someone sees the light as he sees it. He thinks to himself, "There may be hope for these dull minds after all." Mr. Kumar continues with a whisper, as if telling an ancient parable in response to the rhythm of the children, singing, "Course, Sam I am. If I am Sam, how can I know I am not Sam? Sam I am. How can Sam know he is not Sam? I am Sam, therefore I am." Mr. Kumar continues, "You see, children, some things we know with certainty by way of necessity. We can rely on other things by the same sufficient reasoning, such as my hand holding this flashlight." Surprised, his voice fades as his eyes search for the objects of his conversation that seem to disappear into his own rhetoric of false belief. Mrs. Jane sarcastically remarks, "I think, therefore I think." "No," cries out Mr. Kumar. "Let me put it in simple terms. Try to imagine a square with only 3 sides. You see, you can't. A square is a necessary condition." Mr. Jennings jabs, "Tell that to a carpenter like my Uncle Jake. Open any carpenter's toolbox all the way back when Jesus was a carpenter. Inside you'll find a triangle, which they refer to by its proper name, square." "Okay, children, let's move outside so everyone can have their turn," commands Mr. Jennings, and all of a sudden the walls of the cave are consumed by the light. Like snakes shedding their skin, their bodies fade away as the light ruptures every pore of their bodies. Yet everyone is still happily singing as the sound of wind roars through the narrow confines of the cave. The sound of the wind drowns out the laughter in the man-made cavern, much like when a symphonic conductor brings down his baton. But in this case, the sound of hundreds of woodwinds bellowing from the depths below the man-made tunnel, and 1,000 violins slowly march upon them. A massive tidal wave of heavenly music hits them, and then crashes again to a quiet stillness. They see themselves as what they really are, deep within their being. Soul, the light of their own minds, the jewel of their own consciousness, appearing like a snow-white pearl, beaming out in all places and all time. A blissful eternal presence, encompassing all places, all times, and all-knowing. "Sarv Yarbak, Sarv Gyani, Sarv Shaktiman," mumbles Mr. Kumar, inadvertently speaking out their literal meaning in his mother tongue. quite taken in by the magnificence of the moment. Linda calls out but is no longer heard as a child whispers, "I am that?" Mr. Kumar, for the first time in his life, speaks without self-motivation and says, "Yes, I am that." They all speak as one while viewing their lives beneath the heights of their newfound awareness. Not a question arises amongst them as they view their lives in the lower world created by intelligent design, a journey for experience with purpose and meaning. The spelunkers wonder, how did I ever forget that I am soul? I am soul. The next moment they are standing in the cave, each and every one in a 360-degree view of a ball of white light, the light of soul, faces shining and unafraid. They all quietly step out, one by one, making room for the others. Mrs. Jane loudly mumbles, "The good Lord was with me all the time." Linda catches Mrs. Jane's hand and says, "Never, never, never forget." And the children begin a pact by saying over and over again,
Never, never, never forget.
They emerge as the crowd at the mine entrance gawks and twist their heads in bewilderment, not knowing why the emerging troop looks transformed. The next group enters the tunnel as the two businessmen annoy the guide with charts drawn with sticks in the dirt, mathematic figures showing returns on investment. Mr. Kumar has Mr. Diggs' ear again, but this time Mr. Diggs is actually listening. Mr. Diggs begins showing Kumar the remnants of what could have been an ancient tribal site at the mouth of the cave. As Mr. Kumar tries to explain to him in vain that the site was possibly occupied by ancient people thousands of years before the earliest known human dwellings in Africa. Each member of our group has their chance to be baptized by the light of the mine and emerge from the timber frames, except one of the businessmen and Mr. Diggs. Neither of the businessmen wanted to venture into the cramped cavern and had flipped a coin to see who lost and must go in. Mr. Diggs and Mr. Kumar were busy measuring and logging information about the site and about the entrance to the cave. Mr. Diggs had come prepared as if to perform field research. Mr. Kumar is talking while Mr. Diggs is marking a spot with a yellow string.
Diggs, I tell you, as we discussed at the lake, the jiva is much like a mask. The jiva is a mask of soul. The blue stone of the bluff was ingeniously used by these people to show a jiva mask hiding the atma, or the soul, as we call it. It is the first step to an independent life and individuality, where we all struggle for answers through science.
Little Linda interrupts him.
Mr. Kumar, never, never, never forget.
Yes, that's enough. Here's a quarter,
instructs the foreigner.
Go play with the other children.
And continues to rattle on about statistics, records, and artifacts. Mr. Diggs is so consumed in his study that he never so much as ventures past the opening of the cavern to see what's inside. The enlightened businessman who emerged from the mine shaft as the loser tries to explain that the site needs to be preserved and made available to all people, as his friend looks his way and says,
"Come on, what's this? You can't be serious. Are you serious?"
Taken back by the quick rebuke, the first businessman eyes the ground as he recovers his normal self. "Oh no, I was just joking about how much initial capital we will need to get this place started to a point of OPM." "That's the Frank I know," exclaimed his companion. "When do we get our hands on other people's money?" The group did not require any instructions for the return trip as they merged systematically into the correct formation while the businessman and the archaeologist staggered behind. Our guide looks back at the train of people and smiles at all the happy faces lit with the bliss of the mine's mystical light. The guide proudly walks straight, with chest pushed out, and pivots on the spot like a band leader. They all follow with a familiar cadence of tennis shoes and jeans, surrounded by what sounds like a huge swarm of buzzing bees. They descend back on the trail in the coolness of the evening, passing once again my point or her point, and then his point. Next, they pass the deserted hot dog stand as they make their way back down the trail. Soon they are greeted by Hank's Hangout's bartender, grinning from ear to ear as he says, half to himself, "It never fails. Happy trails." The businessmen eye the bartender and Frank says, "Hey, how about a couple of beers?" The bartender disappears under Hank's grass roof and pulls two ice-cold ones from a metal bin of half-melted ice.
The coffee can with the smiley face proves to be much more popular on the way down, as each person digs deep in their pockets and hurriedly stuffs its puffy face. Linda has a hard time chasing and reaching up high for the can till it rounds the bar, where the two businessmen stand, turning their heads away as if the can were a virus. Slowly the can is lowered, all eyes on Linda as she selfishly pushes in the quarter Mr. Kumar gave her. The smiley face can is placed back on the bar, its mouth stuffed with bills of all denominations. The bartender yells, "Luggage claim," as if he were the maitre d' of a city hotel. The group moans as it moves to the small building. One after the other they pick up their packs. It is quite an interesting sight to behold. Variously engineered and designed backpacks and bags of lightweight nylon, each boasting the manufacturer's name, such as My Burden, Your Own Burden, Their Burden, and so on. Linda stands at the door laughing while remembering each of the pilgrims saying, "Never again," as they dropped their karmic load on the way up. The two unruly boys rush in and grab their packs, dragging them out along the far eastern couple's camera bag strap tangled with theirs. The eastern man yells in a heavily accented voice, "Hey boys, stop there! You don't want to chase little asses down!" Mrs. Plain Jane quickly retorted, "Don't talk to them that way. They are just kids." A few volunteers pick up and wipe the mud from the camera lenses spilled into the soggy soil which had been dampened by the ice water runoff from the beer bin. The eastern man looks at his wife, mumbling something in his native tongue. Mrs. Jane yells, "Hey, I heard that." Frank at the bar says, "Yeah, sure, but just what did he say?" The guide tries to cool the group down, instructing,
"Okay, one at a time, please. We'll be back at the camp soon enough."
Our group once again gathers about the escarpment, looking over the snake-shaped river and lake below. They listen to the good doctor separating the Velcro loops from hooks on his trouser pocket. Heads turn as the silver bottle bottom is pointed toward the sky. The doctor looks back as if to say, "And?" They turn back to the vista, wondering why a man of such education and means would stoop so low. All start thinking ahead and of what needed to be done in the days to come. Getting ready for work, getting the kids to school, and so on. Finally, they are back in the camp and are greeted by the campsite fundamentalist, who naturally stay behind. Mrs. Jane eyes her friend from Kansas, Kate, and says, "You wouldn't believe what that man said to the boys." Kate turns to her husband and says,
"I told you we would be better off down here."
Linda catches Mrs. Plain Jane's hand and says,
"Never, never, never forget."
"Okay, Linda, I don't have time for games right now." Little Linda's head sinks as she walks away. Everyone else is in a hurry, nudging through the crowd toward their bungalows or the bathrooms, which already have long queues. After showers and a quick meal, they all sit around the campfire, while those still bright with the light try to share the experience with soul with the campground fundamentalist. The Eastern man had made amends with Mrs. Plain Jane, quietly slipping a $5 bill each to both the boys to shut them up. He tells a story of his youth, hoping the fundamentalist might understand the experience of the mind and soul. The story is about two young pilgrims that left their village in a quest to find the truth. After walking for a long time, they came upon a wall which sealed the outside world from heaven. He moves his hand, as if climbing, while explaining how the two youths scaled the wall.
On top,
His eyes wide open for the fundamentalist,
they saw irresistible beauty all around, and one of the pilgrims jumped over the wall to the ground inside. He motioned for his partner to join him, but his partner refused by replying, "I cannot bear leaving my family and friends behind without showing them paradise first." Thus, the first man became the living symbol of an ancient secret sect, while the other a symbol of community and religious belief.
The story draws a comment from one of the fundamentalists. "That's an interesting story, buddy, but what does it have to do with the journey you made to find soul?" So it was all through the balance of the night, the fundamentalist arguing in a rational, mechanical way, rejecting outright any positive thing about soul that the enlightened group had experienced. As they all went to bed, those whose auras had dimmed from the questioning drifted back into soul just as they zipped up their sleeping bags. Even the children, who were already fast asleep, were still experiencing soul in their dreams.
laughing, joking, and telling funny stories, only to awaken in the morning to unhappy people talking about work, scrambling, arguing, and trying to get out of camp as fast as they possibly could. The guide gathers the group together to say goodbye, passing a booklet around with a questionnaire, with countless tiny bubbles to fill in with a number 2 pencil, each getting his turn. Nobody fills in the essay portion of the survey form. Mr. Jennings gathers the norm of our group, the majority, for prayer. As they gather together one final time, they are joined by the campground fundamentalist, the good doctor, and Dr. Althea from Cambridge. Mrs. Plain Jane catches up with her misbehaving boys as they mistakenly take a wrong turn into the prayer group, succumbing to the solemn bowing of heads as their mother glares down and says, "Just make one move." The soccer mom looks to her brood as if they will get the same treatment as the hippie couple, who in turn gaze at both mothers and take note. Like social workers in an abuse case, they glance at each other and whisper in unison, "Poor children." The 2 businessmen just happen to be close to Mr. Jennings' inner circle to escape the moment of prayer, so in superficial reverence they bow their heads too. Most of the faces still glow with the presence of soul, still lit by their recent experience. A few have long faces and cannot remember why the others look so different. They had lost the experience as they slept and dreamed, and no longer see soul. Those who can still see soul try to comfort those who had forgotten, only to be hushed by Mr. Jennings and hostile glares from the fundamentalist, as if to speak of soul during prayer was sacrilegious. After the prayer, the heads rise in unison, and a few more could not see soul too. The Eastern couple seem aloft in another world, and remain that way until actually experiencing the trip to soul that was blocked by camera peepholes during the trip. As they watch their home movie of the trek to soul with friends and relatives, they exhaust the mystical experience of soul to the uninitiated moviegoers, who defeat the very purpose of soul at every corner with questions. As the Eastern couple put away their special equipment, it is clear that they could no longer see soul.
Mr. Diggs and Mr. Kumar's rent-a-car is loaded by porters who appear to have snuck away from their jobs at the local airport. One of the porters asks Diggs,
"Is this all you have?"
Diggs nods his head. The other porter looks at Mr. Kumar's truckload of experimental suitcases. Back to Mr. Kumar, and then both porters look back to Mr. Diggs as if saying,
"Is this guy for real?"
Mr. Kumar's self-confidence is stung by the gesture, and from this day on, he can no longer see soul too. Linda's mother, Jean, calls to Linda while the motor of her station wagon rumbles. Linda quickly gets inside as they start the long drive home. They had not driven very far before Linda's mom starts to deliver a grocery list of what Linda had to do to get ready for her first day at school. Linda smiles and says,
"Never, never, never forget."
As if on cue, her mom's chatter stops abruptly with a glowing smile, and neither says a thing the rest of the way home. Linda stares out the window, imagining that she is flying over the station wagon all the way home. As they turn into their driveway off Common Street, Linda's dad, who refused the invitation to the weekend retreat, greets them. He eyes the glowing girls as if he should have gone, then quickly asks Linda, "How's my birthday girl? How old will you be tomorrow?" Linda replies,
6. You know that, Dad.
He recovers and says, "Keep out of the den until your birthday party tomorrow." Linda darts to the den to find a dropping paper sign that reads,
"Happy birthday, Linda," surrounded by half-price Christmas ornaments that her dad bought at the dollar store last year that Linda's mom would not let him use to decorate their Christmas tree. After dinner, Linda's mom sends her to bed. "You have to get up early for your birthday party." Linda climbs the staircase that leads to her bedroom at the far end of the hall while singing,
"Never, never, never forget, Sam I am."
Linda's dad turns to her mom. "Forget what?"
They continue the conversation after he turns off the bedroom lights. She says, "Really, Jim, what I meant was, we saw soul." To which Jim responds with a sleepy voice, "That's nice." The light of her face darkens as she questions what she was shown in the mine and drifts off to sleep. When she awakes, she will no longer see soul. Linda and her dad had the party going well before Linda's mom awakes in the morning from the children's laughter and makes her way to the decorated den. She peeks into the party den anxiously scanning all the familiar faces with colorful cone party hats and snail-shaped whistleblowers. The group of little children all sitting around the table, desperately trying to act like adults. As Frankie, a boy Linda just met at the campout retreat, runs around the seated children, blowing a cardboard horn in each face as he passes by. Wanda, Linda's best friend, turns to Linda and says, "Frankie is so childlike. I don't think he'll ever grow up," as she removes her paper cone party hat. The other boys and girls do the same. Linda is the last to take off her hat. Linda then says to the now mature partygoers,
Some people never grow up.
On this day and evermore, Linda will not see Soul 2. Frankie, many years later, is still blowing his cardboard horn in everybody's faces.
If we examine only those features that prove to be rationally similar, then it is probable that soul is at least approachable. If soul can be approached, then it is just a matter of getting close enough to view it in order to describe and illustrate what it looks like. May I never forget Frank Lee True.